someone's come to Earth, and his sights are on soups. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, The Death of Superman Gold Label Edition, Superman vs. Doomsday. Doomsday is an alien creature of overwhelming force and savage bloodlust, whose appearance evokes terror. When he first arrived on Earth, his rampage of mindless destruction devastated Metropolis. The carnage ended only after Superman died, putting the mindless beast down. And while Kal-El tries to keep the beast at bay, I'd like to first thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the new DC Multiverse Superman vs. Doomsday that we could have a look at in this review. We're going to also bring in a couple of figures for comparisons. Some of these have been reused, mold-wise at least. First, though, let's measure Superman. Superman stands in this case about 6.5 inches in height, or the figure's going to be about 17 centimeters tall. Then on to the bigger Doomsday. Doomsday in this case is actually, if you count the ponytail, about 9 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 22.5 centimeters tall. I did say I was going to bring in a couple of figures for comparisons. First, though, with Superman. Superman in this case, though he does seem slightly smaller, is in fact actually using a lot of the molds, mostly the top half up, of the Rebirth Superman that we looked at before. Another comparison, seeing as we just never get the chance to bring him in. Here's what he looks like with the Red Sun Superman. And I thought also another comparison, seeing as we're talking about the death of Superman, here's what he looks like also with Superboy. On to Doomsday, though, who initially I would have thought used some of the elements maybe from Destroyer. And in fact he does, but he doesn't use as many as you may think. The figure only actually uses the forearms and the bicep above it. Here's what the figure also, though, looks like with Calabac. Another equally tall figure, though, but not nearly as tall as the Doomsday we're about to have a look at. Looking at the 2-pack's accessories, unfortunately, really, other than just trading cards and display stands, the only other thing that comes included with Superman and Doomsday is an interchangeable pair of hands for Superman. Now, in the past, we've looked at, obviously, DC Multiverse 2-pack figures before, and they always usually come with a very long display stand with accommodating pegs that you could then take your figures and attach them onto. We don't get that this time around, but at the very least, I would have loved if they could have included, for example, the flag that's made up of the torn remains of Superman's cape. We don't get that either. But, though, let's look at the things at least we do get. First of all, you get yourself display stands. Display stands times 2. The stands themselves are exactly the same from one another. I would have loved if they could have included, for example, the bloodied Superman logo. But you only get just the regular display stands. At least you do get these. We'll put those to the side. The figures then also come included with actual cards. I'm just going to first look at Doomsday. Now, I don't think this is a Doomsday. This is not from the run of the Superman, the initial Doomsday run. But this certainly is. This is from Superman number 75 Newsstand Edition. Because, of course, they're with the Black Bag Collector's Edition. Who remembers first going to the newsstands and picking these up? I still think I have in my collection somewhere Newsstand Edition 1, 2, and 3. The only thing that was different between the two was the Roman numerals, or difference between the three, was that they had little Roman numerals on the top. And I remember arguing with my friend at school. There was a Newsstand Edition number 1. And somebody said that that wasn't the case. Sure enough, I went to the comic book store, and I think I paid, at the time, it probably was $20 to get the original newsstand that had the Roman numeral 1. It was a useless sort of argument. But anyways, you do get yourself 2 trading cards. One is for Doomsday specifically, and then one is for Superman. If you look, though, to the back of Superman, it sort of gives us just a generic read-up of Superman, not necessarily pertaining to the Death of Superman run, but at least you get something a little bit more accurate to Doomsday. And that was the thing I actually read at the beginning of this review. The planet of origin, by the way, is Krypton. And, of course, on here, the real name is Kal-El Clark Kent, as his adoptive name. Always good that we actually get ourselves trading cards, and I still love the fact that they're actually using source material rather than actually using figure photography. Let's put those to the side. As already mentioned, though, Superman does come included with a pair of relaxed hands, or flying hands. Even though the figure doesn't come included with a flight stand, for example, I'm sure you could easily just use one from another DC Multiverse figure. Simply just pop these out from the existing hands. Now, the hands he has right now are sort of more mauling hands. which I'm sure we have gotten before. The one that comes to my mind right now is Superman the Infected, and I think also maybe Bizarro might have in fact come included with these type of hands. But if you though did want to change out the hands, you just very easily pop those off from the provided pegs and then put in the hand that you want to use. You know, again, like if you wanted to have Superman flying, it's fine and good. He just doesn't come included with a flight stand, for example. While we're, I guess, on the topic of Superman, let's have a look at the closer look at this Kryptonian. Now, we'll say right away, the first thing, obviously, already pointing out is the fact that they did use the body that was the same as the Rebirth Superman. The only thing obviously done differently here is the belt. The original belt on the Rebirth suit is obviously just that sort of diamond shape and the little colors of the red on the sides. This, you get more of a classic-looking Superman trunks, but I think actually the trunks themselves are also exactly the same, as well as the lower legs. Now, initially, when we did also look at the Rebirth, I commented that what they've initially done is just painted over the line, indicating over top of where the boot would have originally been. Now, simply, it's just a case now that they've sculpted and painted that in red to match the more classic colors of Superman. Other than that, it does look to be the exact same body from one figure to the other. I wish that they could have maybe used a more slimmer looking Superman body than this one. But if you did want a classic look for Superman, this fits the bill fairly well. He does have the little rips and tears and stuff to his suit that he battles, of course, he gets inflicted with while battling Doomsday. I would have liked if they had gone even further and really ripped him up. And even in fact, like as he's found at the end where sort of Lois is just kind of holding the remains of what's left of Superman, how he's just completely ripped away his suit. I would have loved it, for example, we could have gotten that version of Superman to get paired along with Doomsday here. But I think for what it is, it's not a bad looking Superman. I'm not, I will say, loving the head sculpt. I like this part of the head, and I think it's actually quite good for a Superman head sculpt, but I feel like the mouth seems a little off to me, like he's biting his lower lip. I do like how they've added some additional blood to the top of his head, added some inflicting wounds there down below in the bottom of his chin. But again, while I like this part of his face, it's really then when you look at the bottom half of his mouth, or at least his mouth portion, that I feel it, I don't know, it just doesn't work as much for me. Like the rest of the head sculpt is really quite good. He has, again, like the classic colors of the blue, the red, and the yellow, and a more familiar looking classic Superman logo. This actually is sculpted onto his body rather than actually just painted in place. The thing, unfortunately, though, is when you look at the back of the cape, while it is torn and tattered and it's made of a more softer plastic, unfortunately, one thing that they did leave off, though, was the yellow Superman symbol on the back of his body, which is somewhat ironic considering when you look at the card, the one thing that was done with the Superman newsstand edition of number 75 was the fact that they used then Superman's cape as sort of a flag. And unfortunately, the flag you can't do here because obviously the Superman symbol is completely omitted. We just flipped the cape up, though. You can kind of see the sculpting on the underside. Like all the paint for what it is really well handled. I don't see any problems really with the paint. Like maybe like the gashes, for example, they kind of come across more to me like scratches. I would have liked if they could have used more red in there. But no, all in all, it's not a bad-looking Superman body. I just think that they should have gone all out, for example, like we did get with the DC Direct. I think there was a DC Direct Superman and Doomsday that completely had the suit completely torn away. That would be something I would love to have seen with Superman. Though for the articulation on the figure, the head's on a ball joint, so it rotates all the way around. It looks up that high, so really if you did want to get this kind of flight pose, for example, with a flight stand, you could in theory bring the head up far enough so you can actually see what he's flying towards. Then of course just bring his hand towards Doomsday like this. The head does look down to about that far, and you can also rock back and forth as well. As for his arms come out at 90 degrees, even actually farther than 90 degrees. You can take those arms and, yeah, rotate them all the way around. I will say, though, from the molds of all the times they've actually used this mold, the shoulders seem a little looser on my figure. Now, I don't know if that's just the case of actually using, like, the mold exhaustion of just using the molds again and again. But I notice, like, his arms, his shoulder right here at least, is a little looser for me. The figure does have a bicep swivel. He does have a double hinge on the elbow. And, of course, whatever hands you decide to plug in place, those also rotate all the way around. You can hinge them back and forth. Upper torso is on a ball joint. The lower half, of course, where his abdomen is, does also have a ball joint, so you can rotate that also freely around. The legs do split out, once again relying on ratcheted joints. You take the legs, move them forward, you can move them back. Swivel it slightly at the top of the thigh. There's a double hinge on the knee, of course. There's no articulation here for the boots, just all one sculpt to the calf, but he does have at least ankle pivots back and forth. You can rock him only just by a little bit this much, and there's, of course, always the toe articulation. Not a bad looking Superman. I think honestly, there's some room for improvement. Maybe, again, I don't know if I would have necessarily used the Rebirth body, because, again, like, that's a pretty stocky Batman, or stocky Superman. But I think all in all, it's not a bad-looking Superman. I just don't know if I like the mouth. The angrier face, the angrier expression in his eyes and eyebrows, that worked quite well. But him sort of looking like he's biting the bottom lip, I think, is a little bit of a detractor from me really loving the Superman that they included with this release. Then on to Doomsday, which I think is the superior figure. Doomsday looks fantastic. Now, he's already by now ripped away completely, well, all mostly of his green suit, except for left behind his trunks and, of course, his lower boots. One thing you can do, though, what's rather interesting about this figure, before we kind of talk about the details of him, is that his his abdomen area, some have said actually that his abdomen seems like it's not long enough. One thing you can actually do about the figure is just move his arms out of the way here. If you detach him, now we don't have to detach him completely, well, we don't have to remove this half, for example, but if you take off this top of his figure's body, we'll just kind of put that to the side for right now, you'll see right here in the post, there's a ledge right here of plastic, and there's a ledge right here of plastic. When you get the figure first out of his plastic prison, he's actually sitting on this ledge. If you wanted to, instead of having it all the way, you can actually bring it a little higher up, and it gives Doomsday just a little bit more abdomen. It sacrifices a little bit of tightness, because of course now it's going to be a little bit looser. But if you did want to have, for example, the abdomen longer than what it is fully sculpted all the way around. And obviously you're going to be seeing a little more of a gap if it's pegged in place that way. But there's also a way, really, again, if you wanted to, you can have it a little bit longer than what it is. For the sake of this review, I'm just going to push it all the way down. It just, again, I'm not going to have it resting on this for this review, but I'm going to bring it down to the bottom part of it. And again, we're just going to plug it all the way in place. You can already see how that reduces the amount of abdomen area that he actually has. Now, I did already mention also that this figure does use a little bit of the component pieces from the earlier looked at Destroyer. We're going to bring in Destroyer right now. His hands seem to be the same as well, could be said for his forearms. And actually, all the way up to the shoulder area is also one thing that gets carried over between the two figures. The actual torso is completely different. I thought, for example, maybe they could have used the abdomen area, and I think that was also the case, that they used the same abdomen section, but the top half of his torso has been completely retooled. What's rather interesting, though, is if you look at the original Destroyer, this part of, obviously, is just the ripped away, left behind strands or strips of his fabric. Of course, because he's wearing the suit underneath, or he originally was wearing the suit and he would have just broken out of the suit. Because they did carry that technically then over to this Doomsday, you can still see the sculpted left behind markings of where the ripped fabric was. Of course, being the fact that Doomsday does have the green suit that he would have originally started with when he crashed on Earth. I wish they could have actually taken the time to gone in there and paint this green. Just these few little straps that he's got left behind. He actually has it on this side also as well. So that's one thing that gets carried over between the two figures. And then again, looking at it, it looks like they have used also the same abdomen area. But all the rest of it seems to be completely brand new sculpting between the two. And obviously, if you were to put the two side to side, this one's a much more imposing Doomsday, because he's certainly a lot bigger than the Destroyer we looked at before. So let's move him out of the way. Getting, though, a closer look at Doomsday's face, I'm quite happy with how this one turned out. I'm also very happy to see as well that they did take the time to add an additional articulated jaw that you can open and close if you want to. I know some weren't super happy with the way that they've added the ponytail. I like the ponytail myself. It's more of a softer plastic. It looks like there is a little bit of articulation. I'm assuming it's articulation and I'm not just stripping away the plastic by doing this, but it looks like there may be a little bit of posability. Yeah, you can move it just a little bit back and forth, but that's, I feel it's been painted quite well in that white that he has in the comics. Of course, he's got all this additional bone work that's sticking out from his body and the front of his chest. Big protrusions of spikes sticking out the tops of his torso. He's got all this nice spikeage there on the back of his body as well. Now, again, like this part would have been used from Destroyer, but you can see how all brand new sculpting we get for this part. Of course, a brand new head sculpt. Lower half of his body is also all brand new. And even like the lower legs, which, again, to bring back in Destroyer, I thought maybe they may have used some of the leg components, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Going quickly, though, back to the head sculpt, because I feel like I don't want to rush through this at all. Like, the sculpting of the face is fantastic. I like the darker color that they've added around the areas of his eyes. The eyes really do help to pop a lot more when you've got black all around it. And again, just to show you the sculpting on the inside of the mouth, kind of really hard to make out what's going on the inside of the mouth, but there is a sculpted tongue. It's just really hard and dark to see what it looks like. As for the rest of the figure's body, again, like the classic looking gray suit or gray body for Doomsday, I feel like maybe the gray could be a little bit darker so that, like, for example, the bones sticking out would be a brighter contrast between the two. But I think that the colors still look really good on this figure. I would love to see this guy be released also as a gold label down the road as the containment suit Doomsday, where of course he would have had the entire suit all in green, and of course the goggles that he would have had on the cross of his mask as well. But looking at the lower half of his body, I like the texturing that they've added to the lower, I guess you would say, shorts necessarily. The colors of the green work well. It doesn't look like they've added any additional green, no darker colors, for example. But I do like the way paint's been really well handled here. Nothing seems messy. Nothing seems like it's covered or carried over to the rest of the plastic around it. The only thing I would also say as well is that on my Doomsday, it seems like this leg, not this leg, but this one seems like it's a little bit loose, and you can kind of see the way it's separated. There's a gap right here between the top of the thigh and the lower half of his trunks. I'm just kind of looking at the leg assembly, and it might be just the case, I don't know if you can see it or not, it doesn't look like it's completely all the way in the socket of his leg, so I'm going to see if I can push that back in place. But this lower half of his body is all soft plastic, squishy, squishy, squishy. Of course, all the rest of his harder plastic. But yeah, good looking Doomsday. For the articulation on this guy, now, of course, going back to his head sculpt, it's once again on a ball joint, so you can move it, well, that high up. That's not doing much of anything, but it can look down a lot more, though. You can rock it back and forth also as well. I guess we've already established the fact that his ponytail has a little bit of posability. I don't know if I would twist it all the way around, because I think you're probably going to just end up shredding, just ripping that plastic completely off. He does have a mouth joint, lower jaw, of course, that allows him to open and close his mouth. The upper torso is on a very generous ball joint. Again, you can move the bottom part of his torso, the bottom half, I should say, of his abdomen. You can also move that as well. Now, again, like if you wanted to make this higher, you can do that. You're just going to be leaving more of a visible gap, but it does give him just a little bit more clearance, a little more visibility when it comes to his abdomen area. Arms rotate all the way around, not restricted at all by the spikes that he has on tops of his shoulders. You can move his arms out. I wouldn't necessarily say at 90 degrees. You're getting only about a 45-degree angle bend. He does have a joint in his elbows. Now, I've noticed his elbows are very tight, so just be careful when you are trying to bend these back and forth. And the hands do hinge back and forth. They don't hinge as well, though. I mean, they rotate, but I feel like you really have to kind of force the joint to get them to finally move all the way around. The legs themselves do split. You can take the legs and move them forward, move them back. There's a mild swivel again at the top of the thigh. There's no articulation. I thought they may have put a little cut right here for the thigh, but no, you can't rotate it there. But he does have at least a single hinge in the knee. It allows at least the lower leg to rotate back and forth. And again, you can move the ankle back and forth this way, just really tight on the figure. And you can also rock the ankle back and forth. In all the cases, both of Superman and Doomsday, they both, I should say, have peg holes on the undersides of their feet. So yeah, you can bring back in those display stands if you want a little bit more stability to get these guys to stand. One last time to bring back in Destroyer. Because initially when we had looked at Destroyer, and I looked at Destroyer twice, I always thought that they were going to be logically taking this mold and just reusing it again for Doomsday. It wouldn't have made really all that much sense because, again, like the sizing of this, Doomsday should be a lot bigger than Superman. I mean, obviously that's the case in the comics. So taking this initial mold, just move it back a little bit, taking this initial mold and turning it then into Doomsday would have made no sense whatsoever. They did take, in some regards, they took some of the elements at least from Destroyer. They took the arms, they took the bicep, they took the shoulder, and they did use that also for Doomsday along with the abdomen, but they've sculpted everything else. And the end result is, while maybe Superman comes up just a little bit short, literally and figuratively, Doomsday is an impressive beast that looks fantastic on your shelf if you get the chance to pick him up for yourself. With the recent announcements from McFarlane's team, the one that the set I was the most excited for was the death of Superman, and Doomsday. Now finally having it in hand, the Doomsday delivers exactly what I would have wanted from a DC Multiverse release of him, making him, of course, a much towering presence than the earlier looked at assumed mold I was just simply going to think that they were going to take anyways from the Destroyer and just re-sculpt that a little bit. But no, they thought bigger, they thought better, and we get a better looking Doomsday as a resulting of that. Yes, the arms do get carried over from Destroyer, which is one thing though, with the tattered rags that he has left behind on his biceps. I wish that they could have actually gone with Doomsday here and painted those green to match the trunks and also the boots that he has. But the head sculpt though is fantastic. A nice touch on their part to also include a hingeable jaw so you could open and close it. Unfortunately with Superman though, as already mentioned, he's not as good of a Superman as I would have hoped. Maybe the body isn't so bad. They used, of course, the DC Rebirth Superman body for this case. But I feel like there are a few little absent things, like, for example, not having the Superman logo on the back of his cape, when that's such an iconic burned-in image of the Superman waving cape flag. I mean, the thing that you see on newsstand issue number 75. Why wouldn't they have taken the time to put that on the back of his cape? The other thing about it, though, is Superman does have also that weird sort of expression that they've given his mouth. Again, like from the nose up, it's not bad, but there's something a little off for me, at least, when it comes to his mouth. The rest of the set as a whole, though, is still worth picking up, if not for any other reason than to get a brand new Doomsday as part of your collection. Still, as something I mentioned in the review, I hope at some point we do get ourselves a gold label edition containment suit Doomsday, which of course would have to involve them sculpting a brand new body, because in the actual comics, you don't really see as much the spikes until a lot of that suit gets ripped away. But I would love to see a containment suit release of Doomsday, and how many people also would like to see that release as well. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the death of Superman versus Doomsday. What do you guys think of the set? Is this something you guys could see yourselves picking up for yourselves? Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of this release. Also as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, I want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more DC Multiverse reviews, just an FYI, more are coming your way. Of course, as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.